Hello everyone and welcome to this Q&A session with Jason Morgan and Colin Bradley. I'm Stephen Bradley, Colin's son, and I'd just like to thank you all for joining us. We are so excited. Thank you so much for all of your questions. We're going to cover as many as we can. We're just going to keep going, maybe split it up in a few videos, but we're just going to see how it goes. So firstly, thank you, Dad, for agreeing to do this, and thanks, Jason. Welcome.
It's great to be here. We've got loads of interesting questions, and I can't wait to answer a few of them and hear what Colin's got to say as well.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's kick right off with the first question from Deborah. Which pastel pencils would you recommend? So, Jason, we'll fire that over to you first.
Well, to begin with, to start out with, this question on its own could go on for an hour. So I'm going to keep my answer short and sweet, and I'm going to say Carbothello would probably be my number one. Pitt pastel pencils would be my number two, just because people, I think when they start with pastel pencils, they usually want some form of detail in their work. Both those pencils, a little bit harder than some of the others, such as Caran d'Ache and Gioconda, which can bring with it their own issues of sharpening sometimes as well. So my two favorites are the Pitt and the Carbothello. That's cutting in nice and short.
Nice, nice. What about you, Dad?
Well, I used to use Carbothello when I first started out, Jason. I probably don't know that, but when I first started, I worked with, in conjunction with Swan Stabilo, who make the Carbothello.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of demonstrations for them, so I was well into Carbothello. And it wasn't until sort of about 3 years in that I was introduced to the Faber-Castell. They were new then, brand new. They hadn't.
So how long ago would that have been?
Sorry?
How long ago would that have been?
Blimey. That was.
Not that I want to show your age, but I am interested actually in.
I think it was probably the late 80s.
Right. Okay.
I think.
So they were actually out before then.
I was using them for, I reckon I was using them for about 5 years, 6 years.
The
Okay.
Carbothello ones.
Stabilo.
Stabilo ones, yes.
Yeah, right.
Carbothello, yeah. And then I was introduced to Faber, and I found those to be, there was two reasons why that. One is Faber-Castell offered me a better proposition than Carbothello did.
Yeah, fair enough, yeah.
Did. So that was one incentive. They promised a lot of things, and they kept to it, so I did very well. But the other reason is I found that the Faber-Castell Pitt pastel pencils just tipped the Carbothello. However, I've got to say that I like both. So if I had a 1 and 2, it would be the other way around. I would say Faber-Castell would be my favourites, and Carbothello would come close second. I also like Cretacolor. The only trouble with Cretacolor can be the sharpening side of it.
Yes.
Every now and again you can chip them off, and they're a bit expensive. Yeah, Caran d'Ache, I love Caran d'Ache. I think they're great, but they, quite rightly, they do tend to be a bit soft. But there are places for them, and I use all of them.
Yeah, the first ones I bought were Carbothello. Then I bought the Pitt. I was given to me by Derwent, their full set. I didn't particularly fall in love with those, although they've got a couple of nice colors in there. Then I got the Gioconda because they are really punchy and really colorful. So if you're doing things like butterflies and flowers, they go that bit of extra punch then than say a Pitt and a Carbothello. And I kept holding off with the Caran d'Ache all the time because of the price to start with. And from my background, I'm taught to kind of be a bit more frugal with my art supply. So I always held off, and people were all saying how fantastic they were. So I bought a couple. I bought the black and I bought the white. And the black was really black and the white was really white. So that was good, but they were soft. So I bought a couple of other colors that were good in there. They're very dark browns, because as you know yourself, to get a really rich, reddy brown is pretty much impossible with the pencils. It doesn't go that dark and that rich at the same time. And eventually I shelled out and I bought the Caran d'Ache, and I was absolutely disappointed with the quality of them, because a lot of them had like a very hard grit in them, which shocked me. A little tiny piece of like grit, undissolved pigment or something like that. And to the point that it could easily ruin the pastel mat surface or any other paper surface because it was that scratchy on there. In the end, I had a few emails back and forth to them and didn't get a massive amount of joy and sent them back. So I just selected a few pencils out of there. But for me, it just shows the best is not always the most expensive either. You know, it's just what you like. I've seen some fantastic work done with just Caran d'Ache, but I've also seen it done with the cheaper ones. Cretacolor, I emailed them a little while ago because I got a small set of those. I like their colors as well. They're hardish pencils, so not that different to Pitt. Like I said, the sharpening could be a bit of an issue, but I couldn't find any data at all on light fastness with them. Nothing at all. So that was a little bit of problem I had with that.
Interesting. I don't have any information about the light fastness with Cretacolor.
No, I don't. No.
Interesting you say about Gioconda. We've not had those, not used those. Have you not used it? I've not used them.
The problem we got, Jason, is that I've got the whole set of all four. So
yeah,
Faber, Cretacolor. So I haven't used them all, but I've used a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I think I've got enough.
Yeah, exactly right. Otherwise, you spend so much time selecting your pencils, you're not actually drawing. It can get quite confusing, especially for beginners.
Yes, I think so. Especially, exactly, this is what we're doing. We're introducing people into the pastel pencil world. You don't want to give an endless amount of manufacturers. I think to stick to the ones that we know, and you and I both kind of go along the same line.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah,
with Faber and Swans, and so I think this is probably the right way of doing it. Let people find out for themselves if they want to try something.
Good point. Yes, good point.
And you can also now buy the old pencil like you did with Caran d'Ache.
Yeah,
just buy a couple of pencils and try them out, rather than buying a whole set, which could be pricey.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Deborah. Long-winded answer for that, but we got there.
Yeah, that was actually the short answer. I held myself back.
Fantastic. Okay, moving on to the next one from Lana. I'd love to hear about how you and Colin got started and if there were any particular artists that inspired you. We sort of touched upon a little bit, actually, about how you got started with pastel pencil specifically, but perhaps give a short answer to this, because we discussed in the early episodes of our podcast your story in a bit more detail, but perhaps give an abridged version for this.
Yes, I will. Well, I came from a watercolour background. That was my first love. So I wanted really I was asked to do an animal by a friend of mine, and it was a dog. And I said, well, I'll try. I tried in watercolour, couldn't do it. And long story short, I came across the box of Carbothello, and I thought for some reason, well, I'd give this a go for a dog, and I tried it, I liked it, and from then on I was smitten by it. So that's how I actually got started with the pastel pencils.
And were there any artists that inspired you to?
Oh, artists. Well, again, weirdly, I was a great lover of John Constable's pictures. I went to the National Gallery when I was not that young, but I went there and I fell in love with his paintings. He was my kind of artist, and but I never ended up doing oil. Funny enough, I tried it. I did try oil, and I tried acrylic, and I just couldn't get on with them. So I stuck to watercolor, and from then on, it progressed from there. But that was really my inspiration right from the beginning. And I ended up doing a John Constable picture of not the hay one, what was it, the cornfield, on pastel mat with the pastel pencils.
Yeah.
And that, I loved doing that. That was I reached my peak then. And I really felt that I'd done John Constable justice.
You went full circle, didn't you? Then?
I went full circle from, yes.
But that was quite recently you did that one, wasn't it?
That was about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, 3 or 4 years ago.
About 3 years ago I did that. And,
So perhaps you're still at your peak then.
well, I think I've passed it now. I've done an awful lot of work since then, but it was nice to do something that an artist that I actually did originally admire. Oh, and I still do to a certain extent. That's how I. What about you?
What about you, Jason?
Completely the opposite. So I started with oils. Basically, I've always loved looking at wildlife and wildlife art. And I went to a gallery in Gloucester, Nature in Art, I think it's called. And I saw some fantastic work there by Simon Coombs and John Banovich, which are two incredible, realistic wildlife artists. I could never, ever afford something like that on my wall. But I'd always been interested in art as a child. My mother always, pushed me or led me into it because she was quite artistic with crafts and knitting and needlework and tapestries. So I always did a bit with pencil and graphite. And once I saw those paintings, I really wanted to see if I could ever do anything like that. And at the same time on TV happened to be Bob Ross, and he led a lot of people and gave them confidence to try oils, which people thought were just a kind of a master medium. And I did a couple of those. I got all the giant brushes, put sheets on the floor in the living room for the paint splatter and the smell and all that. I did a few of those. They turned out okay. Give me the motivation, but I didn't want to be setting things up like that all the time and having that smell of turpentine in the living room, because I wasn't in a studio like Bob Ross with a camera crew. So I did things a lot smaller. Went into a spare bedroom and started doing that while I was working research and development in a factory. That was my job for 20 years. And at the same time, the internet started to take off. And it's a weird thing, because I found 25 years ago when I was starting that, there was very little detailed instruction tutorial for art. There were a few books out there and a couple of videos, because I was really into oil painting. So we had something like a video by John Seary Lester, but then they would be American videos. You couldn't really import them easily. Couldn't even find them because we didn't really have the internet. It was the first 1 or 2 or 3 years of the internet. So it was really difficult to learn. And I found when I kept ordering books, these tutorial books, that they would always jump massive stages. So you'd follow the first 3 stages and you think, I've got it. And then all of a sudden you'd be at the final thing and it'll look completely different. And I had book after book on my shelves. So because I was also interested in photography, I started to take photographs of all my work as I was doing it step by step, so that I could teach myself by my own lucky accidents and failures and things that worked, how I did it. So I was just documenting really everything that I was doing. And I thought, I'll try and build my own website. So I started doing that as well. And that's how that took off. Then video came in after 5, 6, 7 years of that. And eventually I got to the 20-year mark in work in the factory. And I thought, if I don't go for this now, I'm never going to do it. So that was about 10 years ago that I did that. So I got into it completely the different way to Colin. The reason I got into pastels then, because oils is probably the most forgiving medium, because you just can't make a mistake. All you've got to do is wait for it to dry and then just go over the top again. So I loved that. And pastels then were the thing that was as near to oil painting as I could get by putting light over dark and that type of thing. But it was a lovely clean medium, so I could just pick it up, do 5 or 10 minutes, put my pencils down, go downstairs, and then come back and do it again. So it was a nice, clean, easy medium to use the pencil. So I've been doing pastel pencils mostly now for about 4 years coming up, I think it is. So that's how I got into those.
That's fantastic. That's so interesting as well. Like, and we'll get into this with some of the later questions, is looking at the style of work and the approach that you guys have is very reflective of your backgrounds. The oil background, the working from dark and putting on lights, and yours, the watercolor background, which is light to dark. It's
opposite, yeah, complete opposite. But the final result is not that dissimilar, but we get to it in a different way.
It's absolutely brilliant. I find that so fascinating, and that makes a lot of sense. Like understanding both of the backgrounds. So lovely. Thanks, Lana, for the question. June asks, have you learned anything from each other?
Absolutely. We've just learned quite a lot.
There you go.
Each other.
I think that's the biggest difference, really, I suppose, for you guys, to learn, the other way of working and how that gives the same results, that you get these fantastic results from.
Yeah. It's a lot of art is personal preference. There are a couple of rules that you need to kind of follow along for things to work. But after that, there's a lot of, variances, and you can really, even I can do things in many different ways and get to the same results. So with Pastel Mat, I did a video about a year ago to prove it. I did one video of a snow leopard's eye and a bit of the fur around it. It's just about 3 inch by 3 inch. For the underlayer on the one, I did pan pastels. For the other, I used just the pencils. On the next one, I use just sticks. And then I put pencils on the top of each one of them for the detail. And in the end, they all look exactly the same. I wouldn't even be able to tell what I'd done the underlayers with. So, you can really get to the end result in many different ways. And that should give beginners confidence, because after you get past the ugly stages, it really comes along in the end.
Yeah, that's also so interesting with your videos, like watching something and even you have to say sometimes to the people watching, now, I know this doesn't look like it's going well, but it is going well, and you'll get to a certain point and
trust me.
Exactly.
But I think that just goes to prove how flexible a medium pastel is.
Yes.
So that should be a great incentive for anyone to pick up a pencil and give it a go. Lovely. Moving on to Deborah's question. Please name your top 5 tips. Probably what would be easier is if we combine the two of you guys. Exactly. Otherwise we'll have tips coming out of our ears. So Jason, if you fire away with one tip that might be great for people.
Well, the first one I would say, and is something that beginners make a lot of mistakes with, don't sharpen your pencils too much. Don't try to get a needle sharpened end like you could get with colored pencils, because they just start breaking on the end. You can't really do that with pastel pencils. So you don't need to sharpen them that much.
Okay, fantastic. Interesting. Dad, will you come up with a tip?
I would say that the choice of paper is really critical. If you get the right paper, it's going to work. If you get the wrong paper, it's not going to work. And generally speaking, we recommend, if you're starting out as a beginner, you use one of the easier papers like Ombre and something like that. And that is forgivable. You can make mistakes and you can rub them out. But certainly, when you get more proficient, I would say the Pastel Mat is my favorite. We also have done a few pictures on UART, so and that works, the fine UART paper. So paper choice would be my second tip.
Have you worked with UART, Jason, at all?
Yes. So my third tip, because we're adults and we can make discussions like this, my third tip would be paper as well. And I would say, as a beginner, definitely use Pastel Mat paper first, because it's the most forgiving.
Interesting.
Because you can layer upon layer on it, you can rub it off. If it all goes wrong, you can get a wet rag and wipe it off completely. Dry with a hairdryer, you're back to square one. So my tip would be use Pastel Mat paper. So we can disagree. We can agree to disagree.
Yeah, that's.
I would. The reason we have come across this a few times with people trying Pastel Mat who are beginners haven't been successful with it. We've seen this on our Facebook page.
Yeah, but I think the thing they're making mistakes with, they're not putting enough layers on it.
I know, but we're talking about layers. You see, that when you're starting out, Jason, you're a little bit uneasy about going overboard, and most people, and we've seen this a lot, they don't put hardly anything on the paper. They just
exactly right.
it.
Yeah.
where we know that that's not going to work. So
Yeah, exactly.
this is why I tend to go along the ombre route to start with, and then
Yeah.
move into, because I've done a lot of work on ombre right up until about 3 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Very successfully, and we've had a lot of success with it. So, you know, it's each to their own, and I think that
Without a doubt.
certainly paper is
Yeah.
either the second and third tip.
So I
Yeah.
think or even the third and fourth. But I'd say if you said ombre and I said pastel mat, would we both agree then that if you're doing detailed animals, which is kind of what we do, or portraits, that you wouldn't suggest as a start off one of the sanded papers, basically sandpaper, because that's what they are?
Well, I wouldn't know. From a beginner, I wouldn't know, simply because we've seen the results of it in the classes that we've done and the pictures. But I would say that I certainly personally prefer pastel mat myself.
Yeah, exactly.
UART is good, and we've done a couple. I haven't done enough, I don't think, on UART. I'm going to do more. But at the moment, the pastel mat is my number one.
What I found with the sandpaper, so UART, Fisher, they're all almost identical. They got different grades, but they're almost identical.
The ones I've used is the 800. That's the finest one.
The finest one.
That we've got to pastel mat. But I've not tried the four. It's a 400 and
Fisher 400. Yeah,
I've not tried that.
Similar again, but I think the thing to keep in mind is lots of people think that you will be able to layer a lot more on these papers, and I've found you can actually layer less than pastel mat. And the reason being is because with pastel mat, it's like a fiber surface. So if you use a magnifying glass and look at the surface, you'll see all tiny hairs interwoven in all different directions, and that really holds the pastel in. But when you use a sandpaper, so it's basically minuscule grit sand on the surface, it's just like mountains with valleys, and because they are rough, even the finest ones are rough, they take a lot of the pastel down into the surface very quickly, and then when you're trying to do another layer on top, you'll find that it smudges and blends together where you've basically filled the tooth of the paper. So I found big expressive works are good with the sand.
Work better with the with soft pastel than pastel pencil.
Exactly right. Exactly.
So people with soft pastel would find that perhaps more acceptable because it's
definitely
easier to use with. But pastel pencil, I agree with you totally on that.
Great.
I agree on that.
Any other tips? Have we got any other tips?
The other thing that I would say, I don't know about Jason on this, but I've always been a believer of, especially in animal portrait work and human portrait work, come to that, you do need to have accurate drawings. The drawing has to be accurate. Now, I started out as a watercolor artist and doing a lot of landscapes, and it wasn't so important. You had to do a reasonable sketch, but not so important. But in animals and portrait work, human portrait work, I'm a stickler for accuracy with your line drawings. If they're wrong, doesn't matter how good you are at colouring, you're not going to correct it.
Yeah, exactly the same. I think the human is so used to looking into the faces of animals or other humans that if it's, especially if you're drawing on a small scale, if you're off by a millimeter or two, especially on the eyes, it's glaringly obvious to even non-artists that there's something wrong. And even, they can't tell what it is. They know that doesn't look like whatever person it is, or the animal face looks wrong. And I think that brings up then an interesting question that I've had asked me all the time. Is tracing wrong? Can you draw yourself, or do you trace everything? Are you against using tools like the measuring tools or gridding? And lots of beginner artists have really got worries about all of that. It stops some of them from doing pastels or oils completely. They think if
stop them doing artwork altogether, wouldn't it? Because Jason, because they're not going to get anywhere unless they do.
That's it.
I started off using the grid system,
Yeah.
Drawing out the grid,
Yeah.
and it worked quite successfully for a while. And now we use our own square drawing system,
Yeah.
which we recommend. And I showed that, and I've done it several times on video to show how it's done. That way, you get pretty accurate, but never absolutely accurate. It's especially on human portraits, humans more than animals.
Yes.
But if you get pretty close during the process of using the pastels, that's when you can make your finer adjustments.
Yeah.
It is easier to do that than find your eye is completely wrong and you've got to redo it because you get into a hell of a...
We lost the audio.
I think we may have lost you, Jason, there, but I think it's caught up with us now. What were you saying there to add in?
I was just going to say that I've certainly got nothing against some people. All they want to do with their art is get to the coloring stage. If they want to trace it, they can do that. If they want to use one of the measuring devices, even Michelangelo was using devices all those ways back.
John Constable did.
Yeah,
I've seen one of his original squids. So it's not right for him. So
yeah, exactly right. So I always say to people, if you think you're cheating doing that, then go to life classes and go to things and do what you think you need to do to do it your way. But, with my Patreon art channel now, I've got to do 3 drawings, finished drawings or paintings or whatever every month. So over the year, I'm doing 36 drawings. I've done that for 4 years solid. So I'm way over the hundreds of drawings, and a lot of them are quite large. They're really in depth as well. So sometimes, well, very frequently, I'll trace my image down on there because the amount of time that saves me, if I was doing that drawing, even though I show on YouTube various ways to freehand draw, basically to prove I can do it, just to show that, it would take me so long doing the drawing, almost as long as the painting itself. I could never get more than probably 1 out a month with all the video editing that goes with it. So I just say, do what makes you happy, because the art should make you happy at the end of the day. So I think that's it for the tips.
I agree. Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, guys. Okay, so moving on to Barbara's question. What is the difference to work from light to dark or from dark to light? And why would you suggest the one or the other technique? I mean, we've kind of talked about this a fair amount, so I don't know if there's anything you guys want to add to that, but I mean, we've kind of explained a little bit why.
I think we could just briefly say that if you want to work the light over the dark, probably pastel mat is your paper. If you want to work it more where you use it more as a colored pencil kind of way of doing it, the other way around, then you could work with ombre and other papers. Would you agree with that, Colin?
Well, I think, again, it comes back to what we were talking about. When we both started out, we were finding our feet.
Yeah.
And I found, coming from watercolor, I actually naturally carried on with that. Because I'm talking about 1985. Now, that's a long time ago. Nothing about, you couldn't, pastel pencils, information, zero.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to use them. So naturally, I worked from the experience I already had, which was watercolor. And that was my basis now. So I carried on doing that. And I shall carry on doing that. You came from the oil side of it and came from another direction. We both met in the middle.
Yeah.
And I don't think it really matters, but I think it's important to express that, how people start out. I mean, nowadays they've got you and I and many, many other artists to see on the YouTube and various mediums. You can see what we do and say, oh, I like that, I'll do it that way. Well, we didn't have that. I didn't.
No, exactly right.
I was just thrown in the deep end. I'm glad I was, but I think that is the difference.
Yeah, and to answer your question about the ombre, what we found is with the ombre, because it's a thinner paper and it's a different texture, the application is going to be slightly different, and the amount of layers that you would get on an ombre sheet of paper and pastel mat is
I don't know whether you could have used the ombre with the dark to light process.
That's what we was. Yeah,
Don't think you could do it that way.
No, because I probably tried pastels about 15 years ago. First attempt, I got the ombre, and I attacked it in a completely oil painting manner. So I went that slightly darker underlayer, and as soon as I was trying to put the details on top light, it wouldn't do it at all. I tried that for a good day or two in all different ways. Because of my R&D background, I like to try things out like that, and I got so frustrated. I put my Pitt pastel pencils in the drawer and shut the drawer for about 15 years, and I didn't reopen that until Pastelmat came around. And that's just because I was attacking it and expecting it to work just like oil painting. If I'd come from a coloured pencil background or watercolour background, I would have gone in that way. It would have worked that way.
It's a very good
Really,
point. It's come out on this